Hello and welcome to Mythical Meeples. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Witch class from Deep Magic Volume 2 by Kobold Press. So for those of you who don't know, Deep Magic 1 and 2 are supplements for D&D 5th edition from Kobold Press. As you'd expect, both focus heavily on magic, introducing new subclasses, as well as a new class in each book. The Theurge from Deep Magic Volume 1 and the Witch from Deep Magic Volume 2. Each volume also contains hundreds of new spells. I think there's nearly 800 in total between the two books, along with several new NPCs and other features. As I said before, today I'll be focusing on the Witch class from Deep Magic 2. So references to witches are common throughout history and fiction. One of the more famous historical references is the Salem witch trials of the late 17th century, and witches feature prominently in William Shakespeare's Macbeth. They can also be seen in many other works of fiction, such as J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, and The Wizard of Oz. The witch class of Deep Magic has a deep and powerful connection to nature, and are able to communicate with spirits and harness elemental forces. So here you can see the beginning of the witch class, and it tells you a little bit about their relationship with nature and the spirits. Gives you a little bit of creating a witch and a quick build. So before we do anything else, let's have a look at the table for the witch. As you can see from here, the witch is a full spellcaster, and if we look at it in more detail, we can see that the table is remarkably similar to the sorcerer, gaining features around the same levels. And the number of spells and cantrips you know when you look down the table is the same as that of the sorcerer. Although it is worth noting at this point that the spells you learn are very different to those of the sorcerer. As you level, some of your features improve instead of you gaining new ones, notably hex and spirit bindings. So you can see the hex here and your spirit bindings here. As your hex die increases as you level and your spirit bindings improve to greater bindings. It's also worth noting here that the level 20 feature, Spell Exchange, is later referred to as Spirit Shroud in the book, so one of these is a typo. So before we move on, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the spells. So the Witch spell list focuses more on getting up close to your enemy. There are some staple spells such as Bless, Goodberry, Healing Word, Lesser Restoration and Fly, but like the previously mentioned sorcerer, you lack in how many you can learn at a time. Some of your spells are from this book, some of them are from the player's handbook, but a lot of them do rely on you being close to your enemies to use them, with spells such as Thunderwave, which is familiar to many people. You'll probably find many witches end up having similar spells. Some of the others available to them are far more niche and require a lot more setup to be able to get any use out of them. The cantrips available to a witch as well are very limited, and you don't have that many good choices, especially for damage dealing cantrips. What you also lack are some of the defensive spells of other classes, such as Mage Armor, Shield, and Absorb Elements, as well as some of the more useful support spells like Hypnotic Pattern, Slow, and Silence. Overall, I find the Witch spell list somewhat lacking and quite limiting, but in that way it's quite nice to be able to build your spellcaster with limitations. So now let's talk a little bit about your abilities. At level 1, you get to choose your Coven. So your Coven is your subclass, so much like a Sorceress Origins, Cleric Domains, that kind of thing. This has a massive impact on how your character plays, as your Coven affects which spells you gain, as well as some of your defensive features. I'll be reviewing each Coven in detail in the future, but we'll speak about them very briefly now. So the Coven of the Hidden Moon focuses on illusion and radiant spells, such as Guiding Bolt and Greater Invisibility, with abilities that make it harder to hit you. Very valuable considering you normally only get proficiency with light armor. The Coven of the Roiling Hearth focuses heavily on fire spells, such as Burning Hands and Fireball, and it also gives you proficiency with medium armor and shields, giving you that extra defense to rely on. Final Coven, the Coven of the Verdant Wood, moves more towards the druidic side of things, with nature-themed spells like plant growth and healing spells such as Lesser Restoration. The Verdant Wood also has abilities that give you the means to control combat around you, as you can interact readily with the terrain and your surroundings. So at level 2, you gain access to your spirit bindings. This is where the witch really deviates from the sorcerer. Spirit bindings are somewhat akin to the warlock's invocations, with the ability to improve them when you reach higher levels using your greater bindings. You get access to a second spirit binding at level 5 and a third at level 15, and there are 5 to pick from. I'm going to talk about each of them very, very briefly. So you get the Brewer's Cauldron, which increases the size of your hit die from D8 to D10, and it means that when you finish a long rest, you and your party can gain a limited amount of temporary hit points. Additionally, if you're using your cauldron as a spellcasting focus, it increases the amount of healing you do when you use spells to restore a creature's hit points. Night Flyer is your second spirit binding available to you. It gives you advantage against being grappled or restrained, as well as an additional action on your turn once per short or long rest, which you can use to dash, disengage, or dodge. You also gain access to flight for up to 1 minute per day, which for me is the main draw of Night Flyer. Third of your spirit bindings is Soul Candle, which you can see down the bottom here. This gives you a bright light, which you can expand to a 60-foot radius. Also gives you a few different abilities, which you activate for a bonus action for a total of 1 minute per day. You can choose between seeing in magical and non-magical darkness, seeing invisible creatures, casting detect magic, and seeing through solid objects as well. And if you use Candle as your spellcasting focus, you also gain advantage on your first spell attack roll each turn. The fourth spirit binding you can choose from is Spirit Book. This gives you access to 3 new cantrips, which you can choose from any spell list. You also gain an additional spell of each level when you gain spell slots for that level spell, which can be chosen from any spell list. This gives you a total of up to 9 extra spells, 1 of each level. The book can also be used to translate any language for you, written or spoken, although you can't speak them. And the fifth and final spirit binding you can choose from is Thundering Aegis. This gives you an extra skill proficiency, and it also allows you to give blind sight to yourself within 30 feet, and allows you to prevent aberrations, celestials, elementals, fays, fiends, and undead from getting closer to you if they fail a save. Last thing it does is, if you use it as your spellcasting focus, you deal extra damage to objects and structures. So for me, of the 5 bindings, I feel the Spirit Book is the most essential of the spirit bindings and should be your first pick. It significantly increases your versatility and allows you to fill in the gaps in the witch spell list. Personally, as well, I really like the Soul Candle, and this would probably be my second pick, but Night Flyer and Brewer's Cauldron are also very good. Flight is always useful, and the extra health from Brewer's Cauldron is not to be ignored, especially when you consider how fragile the witch is. I feel the Thundering Aegis is the least useful, and probably wouldn't pick it most of the time, unless I knew I was going to need blind sight a lot, as it costs an action to activate it, or if I knew I was going to come up against one of those creatures I mentioned previously, and they were going to feature prominently in my campaign. At level 3, you get access to Hex, and you can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, regaining expended uses when you finish a long or short rest. So this functions a bit like the opposite of a bardic inspiration, hindering your opponents instead of helping your allies. Thematically, I feel it really fits the flavour of the witch, and mechanically it can be great for protecting your allies or forcing enemies to fail saving throws. So it costs your reaction, but you can use it when an enemy creature makes a ability check, attack roll, or saving throw, and they subtract your hex die from that roll. Overall, I really like the ability, and I think it's very strong, comparable in some ways to Silvery Barbs or the heightened spell Metamagic, as you can potentially force a creature to fail its saving throw against your spells, giving you a lot of control over what spells go through, and making your save or suck spells much better. At level 6, you get a Coven feature, and for each of the subclasses, this feature interacts with your Hex feature. forcing a creature to make a saving throw, a different saving throw, or suffer an additional effect. The effect varies on the subclass, but each has its uses. So a Witch of the Hidden Moon becomes temporarily invisible to the target. A target of the Roiling Hearth gains vulnerability to fire damage, and a creature targeted by the Verdant Wood has its movement speed reduced. Each synergizes very well with the subclass, which further enhances your own abilities. So at level 9, you get your next feature, which improves, it's your Greater Binding, which improves your Spirit Binding features. You gain another Greater Binding at level 13, and again at level 17. So each of your Spirit Bindings has access to an improved Greater Binding. For the Brewer's Cauldron, it increases the number of temporary hit points it grants, but also allows you to replace some material components of spells that you cast, even if they would usually be consumed. Night Flyer can be activated for up to 4 hours at a time instead of 1 minute, drastically increasing the amount of time you can use it for, which means you should be able to fly it in pretty much every combat you have during that day. Soul Candle can be used for 10 minutes instead of 1, meaning it'll be useful both inside and outside of combat if you've got invisible people you need to see, or you need to see through objects, for instance. Spirit Book allows you to speak and write in any language, as well as reading and understanding them, and you can also ask the book 3 questions in a minute, which can only have 1-word answers, which you can do once per day. Thundering Aegis increases the range of your blind sight from 30 to 60 feet, and also increases the damage you deal to constructs when you use it as a spellcasting focus when you activate those abilities. So for me, the usefulness of the Greater Bindings varies a lot. I feel that Night Flyer has the biggest boost and is the most useful, as it gives you significantly more flight, so you don't have to worry about rationing in it. For me, Brewer's Cauldron is a close second. Being able to replace material components could be incredibly useful, especially if you're having a hard time finding them in your campaign. And for me, the least useful is probably Thundering Aegis, just because I'd be very unlikely to pick it in the first place, although I do like the increased range of the blind sight that you gain. So at level 10, you gain your Coven feature, another Coven feature, and this one works to improve your first level Coven feature. I feel that the Coven of the Hidden Moons feature is incredibly niche and probably won't come up very often, as it requires very specific circumstances to happen. However, I feel that those for the Coven of the Verdant Wood and of the Roiling Hearth are still both very, very useful. At level 14, you also gain a Coven feature. The final Coven feature is vastly different for each of the Covens, whereas before they all followed roughly a similar pattern. The Hidden Moon, for example, can incapacitate a creature, effectively taking an enemy out of a fight, although this feels a bit lackluster at this level, as there are spells that can achieve a similar effect, such as Hold Person or Hypnotic Pattern. The Roiling Hearth ability looks very powerful, giving you abilities similar to a fire elemental for 1 minute. So damage resistance, and you can move through creatures, dealing fire damage to them if you do so. The level 14 ability of the Verdant Wood will vary greatly depending on your campaign. If you spend a lot of time in dungeons or travelling at night, it's not that good. But if you spend a lot of time in sunlight, it gives you some passive healing, which is just incredible, really, because it means that you could be potentially knocked unconscious, reduce 0 hit points, but then you can just passively pick yourself back up by using this ability. So finally, at level 20, you get Spirit Shroud or Spell Exchange, depending on what you want to call it. So in terms of function, this is somewhat like a Paladin's 20th level feature, as it gives you a minute-long transformation. This transformation causes creature of your choice within 10 feet of you to take damage and gain disadvantage on saving throws against your witch spells. And additionally, you can also cast any witch spell that has casting time of 1 action as a bonus action instead, which is really versatile, as you don't necessarily have to do it, but you can do it if you want to. It frees up your action to potentially cast a cantrip or activate some of your other witch abilities, as well as your spell. So my final thoughts. Overall, I really like the flavour of the witch class. It's more of a frontline cast than others, so you'll be likely wanting to play this in a similar way to a bard or sorcerer probably, and your features generally incentivise you towards getting close to your enemies. The base class itself looks very strong. Your spirit bindings massively improve your versatility, and hex can augment your spells. What the class really lacks though is a choice in spells. Spell list itself is very limiting, with some of the spells being incredibly niche, and I think this means the spirit book will be taken by almost every witch to fill in the gaps in their spell list. Although it's the most appealing to me in terms of flavour, I feel the Clothing of the Hidden Moon has the best additional spells, providing versatility and filling gaps in the witch spell list, but the class abilities don't synergise very well with the spell list, or sort of in some ways with the witch class itself. The Roiling Hearth and Verdant Wood look very much like they fit with being a frontline caster, especially the spells and armour proficiencies of the Broiling Hearth. So for me, I think the Witch sits in the middle of the spellcasters in terms of power level. Cleric, bards, and wizards are easily more powerful than it, but the versatility of the Witch makes it easily more powerful than most sorcerers, and arguably better than druids. The Witch is very reliant on short rests, so if your campaign doesn't feature a lot of short rests, then the class will probably struggle to keep up with other spellcasters. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Hope you liked it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This helps me grow as a channel, and it's always good to hear your feedback as well. If you want to see more from me, then head over to mythicalmeeples.com. And if you want to support me in other ways and gain access to sneak previews, behind the scenes, and even more content, then consider supporting me on Patreon. There's links for both of those in the description below. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.